So a warm welcome to everybody to this month, this December's webinar, when we're talking about inflammation. Now, most of you who've heard me before have heard me say that inflammation sits at the root of disease. And as a clinical nutritionist, it's one of the first things I'm looking at when I'm looking at labs or case histories to see what level of inflammation is this person suffering from who's come to see me to support them optimizing their health. And so we're going to go through in this webinar some of the big parts to inflammation, but it's timely because it's December and there are going to be some challenges, food challenges, lifestyle challenges. So I hope this can help you navigate through the December period, the season, festive season, to really get through the other side and looking into January, where everything starts fresh and we really go for it. So especially minimizing some of the damage. So what we're going to talk about, so the hidden root of fatigue, weight gain, and hormonal chaos. Inflammation really sits at this root of health, and to go into it now in terms of some of the problems, some of the solutions, where it's coming from, labs to look at, we're going to break that all down. So let's kick it off. What we're going to learn, what inflammation really is. And there are two kind of aspects that I'll talk about. We're going to talk about a lot of the symptoms that most people ignore, some of the diseases that are linked to chronic inflammation, 5 major causes, key blood tests, and then some of the strategies that are from a research basis have definitely proven their worth, and also anecdotally what I've seen in practice. So here we go. Inflammation. The word says it all. If you cut that word up, in flames, on fire, burning down the house causes some real problems. So now, burning down the house, we often think about that from a chronic perspective. Inflammation actually has so many positive elements. Where I'm from in Western Australia, they will do back burning in the bush to see that a fire doesn't get out of control. So small, controlled, what we might think of as short-term inflammation is healing and protective. What happens? We might get an injury, or we might have an infection, we get a fever, or we get a response, inflammatory response, that'll get the healing process going, and then we'll help our recovery. This is normal. This is great. Thank God we have this aspect of inflammation. But the problem comes when we aren't able to put out those fires, when the fires are continually blazing and obviously growing. That's a bad thing. So it's long-term. It's often silent. People don't know they have this level of inflammation, and it's very destructive. Like I said, it's having fires throughout the body. So what's happening is, in a chronic situation, you're constantly, chronically having these triggers, these things that are going in and damaging cells that are leading to hormones having issues, and obviously your metabolism. So I wrote here metabolic dysfunction, meaning you're not able to use the fuel correctly. And so the body, as I say at the bottom, your body is often stuck between destruction and repair, this process of inflammation going on. We're burning something down so we can rebuild. If you've seen a bushfire, you'll see the sprouts and the growth and all these great things that can happen. But that must mean that inflammation has to take a pause. We must have gaps in between it. If it's chronic, if it's constant, if it's never ending, and we're in a constant, what we call a catabolic process, now we're heading towards diseases. All right. So what are some of the symptoms that can be related to this chronic inflammation? Well, one, a lot of people just experiencing pain and stiffness. So if we're constantly inflaming a joint, a muscle, not allowing it to repair, then obviously it will, in terms of the fibers and the parts of that joint or muscle or area, it's lacking the blood flow, it's lacking that flexibility, that getting the oxygen in there. And so we're going to have, from the nervous system perspective, pain, and from whether it's muscles, connective tissue, we're going to have some stiffness. We're not able to get those, get the fluid going that allows that flexibility, that mobility to reduce the stiffness. There is a massive amount when inflammation hits the brain of damage, when we are damaging this brain from some of the reasons. I'll talk about them in a moment, but high sugar. That's why we talk about type 3 diabetes, Alzheimer's. Like the effects of a high sugar diet, which sugar is the most inflammatory substance in these bad vegetable oils, but they're causing a lot of brain dysfunction. So by damaging, by having too much fire, and the brain can't store its own fuel, so it's got to be constantly fed. And what can happen is, if there's an inflammatory area there, you're not able to get the oxygen, you're not able to function correctly. Weight gain, especially in the belly section, so belly fat, often in inflammatory. So most of you have heard now visceral fat, the fat around the organs, organs being damaged. You might say a fatty liver is an inflamed liver. So when I'm looking at liver function tests and I see these markers, AST, ALT, or these enzymes being high, I'm like, oh, your liver's struggling, and a person may then go off and get an ultrasound to see, okay, do you have a fatty liver? But that fat is inflammatory. Same as the triglycerides. If you've heard me talk before about these cholesterol markers, the triglyceride, out of a simple what we call full lipid test, the triglyceride, in my opinion, is the most important, because it's so inflammatory, having too much of this fat in the blood and not either being utilized or stored. So those are direct pathways into gaining weight. And often when I see a person come out to a center that has fasting, or they clean up their diet, they lose a lot of weight on the scale. And I'll say, that was excess water. Your body was so inflamed. And obviously where there's fire, there's water. So dealing with that root can obviously directly affect the body composition, without even burning the fat. You're simply reducing the amount of stored water, or water having to deal with it. We know that swelling happens around a joint when we hurt it. Internally, it's happening too. So fatigue, mood swings, all the things associated in terms of the brain, in terms of having issues there, it's a big part of our emotional state, our energy state. Think of it, if your body is constantly breaking down, you're not going to feel good. And even if you think, oh, I don't know what's going on, but if your body is in this constant chronic inflammatory state, it is breaking down, and that requires a lot of energy for repair, which are affecting the nervous system, affecting the hormonal or endocrine system. So definitely fatigue, mood swings, the gut. I've talked in the past about the gut, irritable bowel syndrome, and everything related to the gut, the microbiome. If we're damaging, if we've got issues, an inflammatory gut, and essentially an irritated gut, we're going to have those symptoms too: bloating, digestive discomfort, water storage, all those parts will come with it. Recovery. If the house keeps burning down, it's going to take time to repair. You're not allowing enough of a window to repair. So a person might say, well, when I was young, I used to recover from a tear in the calf, or a shoulder issue, or that, like a few weeks and I'm back into it. And suddenly you're thinking, well, I'm over 40 and I'm really struggling with recovery because of this chronic inflammation going on that is not allowing the oxygen, allowing this recovery process. And sleep, chronic inflammation, body constantly working, is affecting the hormones like melatonin, but affecting the whole system to allow it to go into a deep sleep. So there's some of the things. There's a lot more, but that's a good overview of the problems with chronic inflammation. Let's move on to the connections with hormones. So all of you have heard of cortisol. And first thing I say when I do a cortisol test is, what is it about? And people say it's a stress hormone, it's fight or flight. And I might say, what about cortisone? Some people might think around and say, actually, I took a cortisone shot. I've taken cortisone before. What was it for? It was reduce the inflammation. So the body is producing these hormones to reduce inflammation, to deal with stress. Now remember, cortisol's job is to raise your blood sugar to help you handle the stress. Cortisone is to reduce the inflammation. Those two are interchangeable. They're connected. And so you having a lot of inflammation directly affects the blood sugar amount. So high inflammation. I had a friend who had meningitis, and we looked at his blood sugar, and it was like sitting at 180. Hadn't eaten, he was fasted, his body was burning up. Okay, it's affecting your blood sugar. Your body's trying to get the fuel to deal with it. So all the aspects then of cortisol being affected through inflammation, and that's hormonally, blood sugar, thyroid, metabolism, they're all connected in there. Menstrual cycle issues, when there's a high inflammatory and a high cortisol part to it, then the progesterone estrogen cycle gets affected. And we know that in terms of women who have a lot of stress, have a lot of, in terms of maybe dietary, they're consuming a lot of sugar, and that's causing menstrual cycle difficulties. Remember, sugar is so inflammatory. High blood sugar is so inflammatory. We see the amount of women having PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, because metabolically they've got some problems, meaning their diet is high carbohydrate, refined carbs, sugar. So it's going to disrupt the menstrual cycle. It's going to affect then their ovaries. It's going to increase the aging process. And for women, in terms of cause a hormonal decline, because the body is just breaking down. So we have this aging process. Inflammation increases the rate of aging, the aging process, not just from a physical, get a few more wrinkles and gray hair, but internally breaking down these organs. And it affects the men too. So the guys who have high inflammation, it's affecting our testosterone. Our testosterone is really connected to our inflammatory cortisone, cortisol. Stress and inflammation really affect our production. So I see guys coming out, training a lot, wondering why their testosterone is so low. It's because you're overtraining, you're drinking a lot of alcohol, you're doing things that are from an inflammatory perspective to the body. And our sex hormones like testosterone are going to be affected. The thyroid, the master gland of metabolism, is directly connected to the adrenals. Cortisol, cortisone, directly connected to the sex hormones, directly connected to so many parts and pathways. And so if you have a lot of inflammation, a lot of stress in the system, it will cause a problem for this conversion. B vitamins are also massively used during times of stress and inflammation, like B12, folate, and they require this conversion of this T4 to T3. And so if you're not, if your body has a high amount of inflammation, not able to deal with that, then the thyroid's not going to work as well. What's the outcome? Metabolism slows down, we gain weight, we have fatigue, we don't feel so good. Same as insulin resistance. So when blood sugar is constantly elevated, remember, insulin's job is to lower the blood sugar, but if it's constantly elevated because your body's like, give me more fuel, I've got to deal with this stress, this inflammation. The fireman, as I call it, insulin, whose job is to lower that blood sugar, they're getting resistant, they're getting tired, and they're not able to handle it. And so more insulin is required, and they're not doing their job better, they're getting more fatigue. So this cycle then continues. Now blood sugar is not being dealt with, that high blood sugar, because the insulin's not working as well, and this is then causing more problems on top. So from simple stress and the inflammatory aspect that causes and stresses the body, suddenly it's affecting our sex hormones, our metabolism, all the aspects that make us feel good, keep us lean, help us sleep, all those aspects help us recover. So there are direct inflammatory linked diseases. The research is very suggestive. Yes, there are genetic parts to cancer, absolutely. There are environmental aspects to it in terms of toxins in the environment. And some of those toxins, and whether it's a toxin we put in our mouth or we get in terms of our system or from infections, those are affecting the processes of metabolism. And it's very clear now, especially with doctors like Dr. Siegfried, who talks about cancer being a metabolic disease. It's because our fuel system, we're not processing. And for me, I keep coming back, and that's why I've spent so much time on blood sugar regulation. It's so important. Balancing your metabolism, mastering, as I would say, the metabolism, because the links between heart disease, cancer, so the next cardiovascular disease are so strong today. But then we've got the aspects of autoimmune. When we look at something like Hashimoto's in particular, thyroid autoimmune conditions, we're seeing that there's an inflammatory aspect, often because of infections, unknown infections, viral infections, bacterial infections, fungal infections, those causing the immune system to be hyped up, to be ramped up, increasing, obviously, in terms of inflammation, and this getting into that cycle. Alzheimer's, I talked about. Type 3 diabetes, inflammatory condition. There's a lot of new research coming out about that. Arthritis, including rheumatoid arthritis, in terms of the mechanical arthritis. Obviously, there's in terms of joints and being affected through inflammatory processes, but rheumatoid, where you're feeling over the body, this inflammatory condition, depression. It's a big one today. And the connections with an inflamed brain. And we often talk about an inflamed gut, an irritable gut, and the gut and the brain are totally connected. We might call the gut the second brain. But the two, this enteric nervous system, as it's known, is directly related. People with gut problems, having depression, having mental health problems, it's very strong. So they're just a part of or some of the problems that we have when inflammation just takes over and we can't control it. So what are the main causes? For my mind, what can we control? That's what I want to look at. Some of the aspects I haven't included here is toxins from the environment. We can try our best. So I always say women should, what you put on your face, you should be able to eat. But the first thing we should all look at is dietary-wise, in my opinion. Looking at sugar, looking at vegetable oils. Once had a family from Dubai, and they were all pre-diabetic, inflammatory conditions, really poor health. And I said to them, what are you eating? And it was mainly 7-Eleven. And they said, because the environment, like the vegetables are sprayed and they're not in good shape and the fish has got heavy metals. And I said, but you've substituted it with just processed foods. If you had the real foods, then it may have had pesticides and it may have had some mercury and it may have had those things. They're not going to cause as much, and we can deal with that in terms of, yeah, you could do heavy metal detox, just checking. There's certain things, and it's not easy, but directly putting fire into the body in the forms of sugar and these inflammatory high omega-6. So you've heard of omega-3, anti-inflammatory. We're going to need them. But vegetables are high in omega-6. That's pure fire. So those two pure fire. If you can eliminate, or it's impossible to eliminate just about, but if you can reduce those two as much as possible. Unfortunately, like being out here in Thailand, they're cooking with vegetable oils, unless I know the place, and they might use coconut oil or even olive oil, hopefully not overheated. But it's very rare. Most are using those oils. You eat deep fried food, there's a problem. There's sugar everywhere. So consciously reducing those two as much as possible. What feeds infections? Sugar. Remember, I was just watching something in terms of cavities. It's not the sugar that's causing the cavities, it's the bacteria, but the bacteria are feeding on the sugar. So if you can take and look at the root cause of these infections that are out of control, whether it's like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, there's too many infections in your small intestine. There shouldn't be like that. There's too many things going on. And so if you have what we call dysbiosis, is this imbalance of good bacteria and then the pathogenic bacteria, fungi, that environment, that microbiome, that is going to be causing a problem there. So how do we deal with it? Well, doing number one, it's like refer to number one again, to help with infections. It might need more treatments. It might need to have a look what's going on. Obviously, things as I've talked about in the past, have a look at the microbiome videos. And really, I've added as much as I can to get you started and to give like a really strong foundation in terms of the microbiome. So definitely have a look at those videos using fermented foods, but just cutting their food supply down. The yeast, the bacteria feeding on that sugar. Chronic stress. Now, this is a tough one. Not to say that cutting the sugar and the vegetables is easy and dealing with the infections, but the mental, emotional parts, it's a big one today. And it's really one that if you can Everyone has their different approaches, and I've previously put a lot of work into the mindset. So if you want to have a look at some of in the Facebook group, or in terms of the material that I've sent out, but having to deal with chronic stress, mental, emotional stress, a lot of different processes. For me, I go back to, what are my values? How do I, in terms of handle stress, what mechanisms do I have? I had a talk last night, and it was about looking at cortisol, but the big thing that I talked about was the fact of trying to put it in its place too, trying to always, there's books out there, don't sweat the small stuff, but trying to stay anchored to something, focused on something, and saying for those other things, do you know what? I'm not going to let those ones get to me. I'm going to focus on the things that I have control over. It's having a practice too. The other part I said is these tools like mindfulness, meditation, autogenic therapy, cognitive behavioral, acceptance commitment therapy, all these therapies, they need to be addressed or used on a daily basis, not just when times get bad, because then we don't often go to them. So having routines where you can have elements of mindfulness, meditation, reflection, breathing, those sort of things that help with chronic stress on a daily basis. It's our habits. Remember, we are the collection of our habits and our rituals. Sleep dysfunction, obviously, that is a major cause. We heal, we recover, we repair. All those R words, as I call it, happen when we sleep. That's why night shift workers, people who are flying, captains and flight attendants, and all the rest, people in the military, suffer a lot in terms of inflammatory issues because they're not getting the repair time. If your job doesn't allow you to sleep a normal circadian rhythm, going to bed ideally before 10 and waking up with the sun, then you really have to tighten up things like the sugar of the gut, mental, emotional stress. You really have to work harder on those. Deficiencies, you don't have enough vitamin D, problem. You don't have enough omega-3, problem. You don't have enough magnesium, problem. Talk about individual vitamins, minerals, cofactors all day, but we want to get the maximum amount of nutrients, and often it's higher than the RDA, or the recommended daily allowance, but we want to get them into the body regularly, hopefully a lot by food, but occasionally, like I'll take some supplements. All right, next. So how do I know if I have inflammation? Well, we went through some of the symptoms, but are there tests? Absolutely, that can help me define it better. And especially I can do a before and after. I'm going to work on these aspects, and then I'm going to see the result. HS stands for high sensitive C-reactive protein, is a direct inflammatory marker. Just be careful when doing these tests. Don't do these like if you're doing a well-being check, if you're sick. Do these only. If you have a cough, don't do the tests unless you're seeing the doctor and you have to see what's going on, but don't do them because these markers will be affected by infections. So if you have a sore throat, just give yourself extra time till you've recovered. But high sensitive C-reactive protein is a classic marker. ESR is essentially how sticky your blood is. I always include this because I want to see blood flow. Remember, oxygen is the healing element. It will help in terms of nourish these cells, help them recover, repair, produce the energy. Our cells to repair need the energy to do the job. And so we want good blood flow. Homocysteine, we consider more what we call an oxidative marker, requires B vitamins like the folates, but in the methylated version or in an active version to be broken down. So too much homocysteine, often it's because of genetic factors. There's something called MTHFR that if you have this genetic part, then you may have a buildup of homocysteine. Was one of the original ways in terms of cardiovascular disease. Getting that on the list. Ferritin is a store of iron in your liver, but it's also an inflammatory marker. Having enough iron is important. Having too much can be an issue. And if it's really high, it may suggest there's something inflammatory. HbA1c is a long-term blood sugar marker. Super important. Pre-diabetes, diabetes, very inflammatory. If we know what happens to diabetics, like let's say the type 2, the risk of losing limbs, eyesight, body burning down. A CBC will look at the red blood cell, how, like the hemoglobin, how much oxygen is going through the body, and also the white blood cell. High white blood cell, consistent or very low, may suggest some immune system issue. Liver and kidney, like I spoke about, liver is very much, if you've got high, what we call enzyme markers like AST, ALT, can be suggestive of a fatty liver and need an ultrasound to check, but it's an inflamed liver. Same as kidney function, if there's anything going, because the kidneys are these filters that are obviously dealing with the byproducts of our metabolism. So having that is, for me, really important. There's more testing out there. The reason I included, I mean, I would personally love to see people's vitamin D. I love to see often B vitamins. I look at things like uric acid. So there's more tests out there, but these give a good snapshot, a good overview. And there it is, extra tests. Vitamin D, HbA1c went in twice there, uric acid, triglycerides, D-dimer, so part of the lipid test. Okay, strategies to put out the fires. You've heard me, if you've heard me before, you've heard me talk about the 4 foundations of health: mindset, lifestyle, nutrition, movement. We are the sum of all these parts, okay? That each one, some people need to work on one more than the other, but they are all critical. So let's, sorry, I'll go back to that for a second. So when it comes to mindset, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to be in a state of peace as much as possible. I'm trying to be clear. I'm trying to be anchored to something to deal with that cortisol. When I am stressed, when I'm overwhelmed, I'm not able to repair, and inflammatory marker or inflammation can get out of control. Lifestyle, sleep is an absolute, it's one of the most important parts. I want to look at my morning routine. I want to look at my evening routine. Waking up in the morning as early as possible and getting some sunshine, help get the blood flow. I talk about wake, water, walk. It's such a great way to start the day. Get some water, put a pinch of salt in, get the oxygen, get the blood flowing. Before you go to bed at night, turning off in terms of the lights as early as possible. You're putting a blue light filter on, winding down, allow yourself this time to repair. This is where the firemen come in and put these fires out, okay? And part of it, the balance, blood sugar bits balanced, repair happens, all this magic happens when we sleep. Nutrition, go for nutrient dense, reduce as much processed, ultra processed food as possible. High in terms of omega-3, so I love like sardines. You might have, there's a craze, and I'm cool with it, like people eating even like maybe eating 100 days worth of sardines. It's quite radical, but introducing small fish without the mercury loads like the tunas, but the small sardines, those small fish, just trying to see it's in either it's extra virgin olive oil. I like it in salt water, brine, but having enough omega-3s. I like my mussels from New Zealand, fatty fish, mackerel. You can get it from a plant, so you can get the algae, the omega-3s from there. They can be really helpful. But just a clean diet, reducing the sugar, reducing the vegetables, replacing with good fats from my mind, saturated fats like coconut oil or ghee or tallow, monounsaturates that are more classified in there, like extra virgin olive oil, avocado. Just watch out. Get brands that you trust, because they do dodgy things with oils nowadays. And then if I'm my polyunsaturates, I've got to be careful of. So those sunflower, safflower, high omega-6, I want to avoid as much as possible and really encourage enough omega-3 to reduce the inflammation. So omega-6, pro-inflammatory, omega-3, anti-inflammatory. Movement, got to get my blood flowing, but I don't want to damage the body. So there's people out there doing like 4, 5, 6 hours of training a day when coming out, and they're already fatigued. It's not a great thing. They might get some short-term gains. Hey, I lost the amount of fat, and I got a result. We just have to watch out of breaking the body down. So go with where you're at. If you're feeling good, train more. If you're feeling tired and exhausted, do more energy building exercises, yoga, tai chi, walking, swimming. Focus on more of that, stretching, mobility, focus on that. Body's got to move, just don't bash it and don't try to get injured. Supplements. So I've already talked about the omega-3s, critical. Most of you have heard of turmeric, or the component of curcumin, which is the powerful part, anti-inflammatory. Vitamin D, yeah, please put it on a blood test. It is expensive, like when we do out here, but if you can get it covered, it's critical to this repair. It's like what we call a pre-hormone. It's helping the hormonal process, and that includes recovery. Magnesium is a go-to for every person that I see. We're not getting the amounts of magnesium we should because of our soil quality, or food quality. Probiotics, antimicrobials like garlic to bring down the infections can be really powerful. Have a look at my previous videos when I go more in depth on those. All right, so let me wrap up. What causes the chronic inflammation? Remember the chronic, the acute, I got tennis elbow or I hurt my knee, rest, ice, compression, elevation, rehabilitation. Most of you know that acronym RISA, but chronic inflammation, we've got poor dietary choices, massive amounts of stress, going against your circadian rhythm, infections from overdoing antibiotics or being in a house that's full of mold. But there's some of the big reasons. Taking in a lot of toxins, medications, certain things. So we have to be careful of that. I've talked about the blood tests, going over that, but blood tests can be really valuable to get an assessment. How am I doing now? And then checking it again 3 months later. If something's high, I like to check it in 3 months. Health risks, you name it. It's the root of disease. We think of that tree and we see that root: cancer, heart disease, metabolic issues, immune system dysfunction like autoimmune conditions, skin issues, skin's related to the gut, like you name it, it's related to inflammation. Lifestyle-wise, diet, exercise, sleep, stress can affect in a positive way or a negative way. So what are the choices we're making every day? I am really big on trying to every week have even a goal, saying, what am I going after this week? What am I going to try to achieve? Okay, I'm going to work on my dietary-wise. I eat too much processed food. So this week I am going to focus instead on every meal having whole foods and protein and try to make myself full and satisfied. Instead of just saying, I don't want to eat sugar, you want to say, I'm going to really replace, I'm going to go that. And if I want the sugar afterwards, okay. So trying to think what works for you, but going through it. And that's in terms of the steps, what I would going through that process. If you do, inflammation is a constant thing in our body. We're all battling it. It is increasing our aging process. So what can we do that we're trying to live as clean, as healthy as possible? From our sleep, having good sleep, what they call hygiene nowadays, to stress management, to dietary wise, eating is clean, and movement that's supportive. If we can really look at all that. So I hope this webinar has been useful. If you, in terms of going into that and you're in the Facebook group, if you want to add something, questions related. But what I hope is that you really can look at it. If you think in terms of like, do your annual blood test, as I said, ask the doctor if you can put in some of those, add those to the list, look at some of your habits and see if you can, if there's a few things you're doing that is creating inflammation, work on one at a time or two at a time. Don't try to change everything at once. Say, I'm going to try to reduce that, or I'm going to try to increase that. Find the things that work for you. So I hope that was really helpful. And I'm wishing everybody a smooth sailing into next year. We're at the end. So hopefully in December, it's not a case of trying to deal with the damage in January, but just trying to have as much control over your actions. So every day, see look at your plan. Okay, what habits am I going to put in there? And like I said, often it is a case of reducing the damage there and really getting ready for next year, getting that mindset. All right, take care, everyone.